Hello, welcome back to the Arrell Food Summit. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining us. I am Suman Roy, and I'm the executive director of an organization called Meal Exchange. And we work coast to coast to coast in Canada in post-secondary institutions on food security and hunger. So I'm really pleased to moderate this very important conversation about race in food production and COVID. Really three interesting parts. So the structure of this session is that we will have a conversation with our very amazing panelists and then take questions from the audience. So please use the chat box on the lower right-hand side of your screen to enter any question that you may have or start thinking of questions because it is really, that is where the conversation lies. So without much ado, I'm going to first introduce our first panelist, Stephanie. Stephanie, take it away. Do you want to take a few minutes in introducing yourself and telling a little bit about what your world looked like prior to 2020 and how has COVID impacted your operations?
Hello, Akwai. Stephanie Quinn Davidson, Nuisiwank, Noei Apayunyo Tayo Kisk. I said, hello, my name is Stephanie Quinn Davidson. I am Brotherton Indian, originally from Wisconsin. I currently live and work on Dena'ina lands here in Anchorage, Alaska. I am the director of the Yukon River Intertribal Fish Commission with Tanana Chiefs Conference in interior Alaska. And just for everyone who's tuning in today, to give you some perspective, our tribal organization represents nearly 40 federally recognized tribes here in Alaska, and our service area is larger than the size of Texas. So just a perspective of what we're dealing with here in Alaska. What was my world like prior to 2020 compared to now with COVID? Wow. You know, because in Alaska, we don't have a lot of access to our villages. We don't have roads that go out to our villages. We travel by plane and by boats. A lot of our villages don't have grocery stores. They really rely on the lands and the waters to feed themselves. The land and waters are their grocery stores. What's changed this year with COVID is that we are unable to travel out to our communities to assist because of COVID, because we don't want to take COVID into our communities. A lot of our communities don't have good health systems. We don't have hospitals out there. Some of them don't even have clinics or health aides. So to bring COVID into our communities would be really tragic. So we've had to really scale back in how we communicate with our tribes and work with them to do the good work of advocating for their traditional ways of life. We've had to move to virtual setup, which is also a challenge because a lot of our communities don't have broadband. So it's really, this year has highlighted a lot of inequities and problems in the system and how we're able to best serve our tribes here in Alaska when it comes to advocating for their traditional ways of life and for their wild resources.
Wow, that's amazing. Thanks a lot, Stephanie, for this. Our next panelist is Bill. Bill, would you want to take the same questions as to what you do and introduce yourself and what your life was before 2020 and how has COVID impacted your operation?
Hello, I'm Bill Thorne. I own Sky Island Farm with Katie, who is my partner of 18 years, and our two kids help a lot on the farm too. Our journey towards farming started about 12 years ago. 12 years ago, we moved to a very small, remote piece of property in Northern California with the intentions to build a homestead. We stayed on that property for about 5 years, a little under 5 years, where we, developed a lot of different skills. We cooked mostly over fire. We set up a gravity water feed, which provided enough water to grow a quarter-acre of vegetables, a small 14-acre orchard or 14-tree orchard. We also kept meat chickens, laying chickens, ducks, sheep for meat, a small herd of dairy goats that we used, that we milked for cheese and yogurt. And after about 5 years there, we ran into water issues because we pumped out of a spring, and very long and rough. And so we kind of were looking at our future, and we wanted to be able to provide more food, or provide food for people, and realized that the place where we were wasn't going to be able to afford us that opportunity. So we started looking north, and west of the Cascades. So, and we ended up in Hump Tulips, Washington, where we found 15 acres, and now we run Sky Island Farm, which is we're a small, pretty intensive vegetable operation. We grew our operation from about 25 members 5 years ago to now we serve 150 families this last year. And our focus has always kind of been to provide food to underserved communities. Like the community that we live in now is not a very wealthy community. It's very rural, pretty poor. But we felt like, everyone deserves access to good quality food. And so that's been our focus. With our CSA, we always provide sliding scale. We give people all sorts of different options as far as payment. We can set up whatever payment arrangements people need. We've also done a lot of community outreach. We speak in schools around the area. We have field trips out to our farm. Let's see. We worked with the local hospital with a veggie prescription program. That was really cool, and that was running until last season, when the whole COVID thing hit. We also worked with. We were working with some schools. We were wholesaling to restaurants and stores. But once the whole COVID thing hit, everything kind of changed pretty much overnight. A lot of we were in talks with a lot of restaurants and a particular school program in Seattle. And the restaurants, a lot of them that we were working with, they decided not to actually even, a lot of them had to shut down for a while, but then, when given the option to reopen, a lot of them opted not to. The schools paused the program that we were working on. We didn't know if farmers markets were going to be open. The Veggie RX program was postponed indefinitely. And so basically what we were left with was our CSA, which we had already kind of set up to be a low contact sort of CSA, where our customers, they order online, and then we then take, the subsequent week, we deliver the vegetables to a cooler on their porch. And so we were already set up to do that, but we were planning on downsizing our CSA before this season. But after that, the whole COVID thing happened, we decided to reopen signups and focus strictly on the CSA. And I kind of feel like with the concern with the whole food supply chains, and just a lot of people started to focus more on local options, and it benefited us. I actually feel like, in a strange way, we ended up with far more interest in our CSA. We actually ended up filling up. Usually it took us, a few months to fill up just the 50 slots that we were doing before. And this year we expanded to 150 slots and got those all filled within a couple of weeks. And I hope that I hope it keeps going. I'm not sure you know, how people's interest in local will continue. I have no idea. No, I don't know. I'm not really
Absolutely.
convinced that it will, but
You're right. It is really interesting, Bill, what you're going through. I love the veggie prescription thing. That is so cool. Next will be Cheyenne. Do you want to take over the same questions?
So, hi everyone. My name is Cheyenne Sundance. I run Sundance Harvest, which is a year-round 1/3 of an acre vegetable farm in Toronto, Ontario, in Canada. And I'm happy to be here because today I was harvesting spinach all day in the snow. But a bit about myself. Sundance Harvest started in 2019 when I was 22. And the idea of Sundance Harvest is to be a food justice centered farm. So what that means is that I grow great vegetables. I grow tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, kale, chard, all of those great tasty produce. But I also grow projects from seed to harvest. So Sundance Harvest runs a program called Growing in the Margins. And what Growing in the Margins is a 12-week mentorship program per season, so spring, fall, summer, winter, that is for youth who are within the margins of the food system. So youth who are from 18 to 25, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, persons of color, queer, trans, two-spirit, non-binary, gender non-conforming, and youth with disabilities. So any of the youth with any of these intersectional marginalizations can participate in the program, and the program is specifically for youth who would like to farm, either start their own farm or become a farmer at someone else's farm. And I'm happy to say Growing the Margins has created so many new opportunities. Last year's cohort, one of the youth, they now manage one of Food Chair's school-grown farms. Another one works on a rooftop farm right now. And a lot of the youth in my fall cohort, which is currently ending this week, they are starting their own farms. One of them is starting a farm in Guelph. Another one of them is starting a farm right next to me in Downsview Park, where Sundance Harvest is located. And a lot of them are starting amazing cooperative farms, working with the actual youth that they're learning with. So I'm really happy to say that next year, the landscape of agriculture in Toronto and the surrounding areas is going to be incredibly femme and incredibly racialized. And Growing in the Margins is a free program. So there's really very little barriers for youth to gain entry in this program. And I always make it my mission that when the 12 weeks are over for the mentorship, I'm still there for them to help them access to land resources, seed resources, or anything they need. So my world prior to 2020, well, it was a time. Besides going dancing and having a fun time with my friends, I went to the farmer's market a lot. So Sundance Harvest sells via a CSA year-round, and my CSA is actually weekly. So people do not pay a large sum of money up front. What they do is each week, a smaller sum of money is deducted from their credit card, and they pick up their CSA at any pickup point in the city that is a Sundance pickup point. But before COVID, I did farmers markets a lot. I loved farmers markets because I got to talk to people, and people loved asking questions about why I was growing spinach in the middle of December or January. And I have 2 greenhouses, so I was really lucky to be the only farmer at many farmers markets in Toronto. So my life before COVID as a farmer was filled with farmers markets and filled with a lot of conferences and workshops in persons, which I loved. I would say that similar to Bill, that there's a lot of interest in local agriculture. My CSA sold out in 2 days, and my wait list is very long. So I'm excited about that. And I'm also excited about the growing understanding and support people are having for Sundance Harvest in terms of racial justice. I'm seeing a lot of allies step up and understand what Sundance Harvest is doing for the community, and I really appreciate that. But I would say that I can see even more now than last year a growing interest in organic food, and especially organic food grown in the city, which is kind of a rare thing to see.
Cheyenne, you impress me every time I talk to you, especially with the work you're doing with BIPOC youth. Amazing. Last but not least, our panelist, Chris. Chris, please take it away.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning. or good day to everybody, I guess. So my name is Chris Ramstrup. I'm an organizer with Justice for Migrant Workers. We're a volunteer activist collective based in Toronto, but we've got members and allies and comrades across the continent. And before COVID, we were preparing for this year to try to organize, to work on issues such as workplace safety, injuries, employment standards violations, and trying to push Canada to recognize the history and the legacy of what the farm worker programs have done, not only to workers here in Canada, but also in the home countries where they come from. Canada, for the last 54 years, has had a managed migration scheme called the Seasoned Agricultural Worker Program. It's a system of indentured labor, where workers are tied to one employer and must return at the end of the season. It's a racialized program because the participants are all from the Caribbean, from Mexico, and now there's also for the last decade or so, the temporary foreign worker program, which basically workers from the global south participate for anywhere from 8 months under the SOP program to 1 to 2 years under the low skill program. And this power imbalance that exists has created a litany of abuses that's been highlighted almost every day in the media, both here in Canada and across the world. So we were in the preparations of trying to address some of these particular issues and trying to push the federal and provincial government simultaneously, as well as build power with workers to address these systemic barriers. Now, COVID has created both possibilities, but many limitations and many crises that we're dealing with, which my phone is still buzzing as we go here right now. So to start off, many workers who were supposed to be here in March or April didn't come to June or July. One of the things that we have to understand that for many of the farm workers from the global south, this is their only source of income. So not being able to access Canadian benefits and not having an income, farm workers were not able to have any salaries, and which lost thousands of dollars to work, the only source of income that they have here in Canada. The farms, right from the beginning, we were raising flags around the conditions, saying that the congregate housing, the absence of social distance and protections, the absence of regulations, and the constant threat that workers face because they are tied to one employer would cause a problem on our workplaces across Canada. We ended up being right. The federal government has failed to protect workers. To date, in Ontario alone, we estimate about 1,800 to 1,900 workers who have had COVID. 3 workers have died that we know of at present time. We have about 4 outbreaks that are going on right now that we're trying to respond to. And it's been a crisis overall. It's been a system where we believe that the employers have been negligent to provide protections. Employer lobby groups haven't addressed the issues, and they basically have been stonewalling. And the federal government has remained silent, besides a few particular accolades. So, in this crisis that's occurring right now, there is opportunities and there is hope. And I just wanted to close off by saying that in spite of the chaos, and prior to this chaos, prior to the COVID chaos, we've been organized with workers to undergo various forms of resistance in the workplaces. We've undertaken marches. We've seen so many workers who have so much to risk, but yet have been willing to put everything on the line, basically not only for themselves, but for future generations, for workers. And COVID has been no different as well. We've seen workers try to expose the conditions on their farms, come together to try to put pressure on their bosses. And I think a wider understanding and consciousness amongst people across the continent about the implications of farm labor and the impact of our food system, which is premised on exploited labor. So I think there is still hope every day, a lot of heartbreaks, a lot of crying, a lot of sleepless nights. But the will, the desire to fight and to make things better is what keeps us driving to the next day. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. I think that brings up to the next question that comes to my mind. And maybe I'll start with Stephanie, you on this again. What do you think are the systemic challenges that affect the BIPOC community in the world of food production? And how has COVID exposed the vulnerabilities that we already had and brought it to the forefront? What do you think, Stephanie?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think I'm probably a little bit unique among the panelists here in that I'm representing folks who are relying on wild foods. We're not cultivating our foods. That said, we have a lot of inequities in our system when it comes to wild foods in Alaska. Alaska, our tribes, our Alaska Native people do not have sovereignty over their resources, over their food resources. Unlike the lower 48, where we have reservations and people are able to, tribes are able to manage their own natural resources, we don't have that here in Alaska. The natural resources are managed by the state and federal agencies, by the governments. And as a result, our voices are not at the table as they should be. And like I said earlier, our people rely on the food, on the lands and the waters for their food. And when decisions are being made in a westernized structure by primarily, white people who maybe aren't from Alaska originally, who don't understand the cultural connection and spiritual connection and reliance on these resources, when those are the folks who are making these decisions, right, they're maybe not making the best decisions for our tribes. So what I really see, and especially what COVID has kind of highlighted for us, I knew this before, but man, COVID has just really brought this to the forefront, and that's the disconnect in our resource management system. Right now, our resources are managed as, the fisheries are managed as we are looking at just how many salmon are in the river and how you can fish. And then the game are managed completely separately. How many moose are out there, how many caribou. This year, we saw that people were unable to really access their salmon harvests, in part due to COVID, and are relying more on moose and caribou. But those management systems aren't talking with one another, and our tribes are relying more on the game, but the agencies aren't managing it such that's giving them more opportunity to rely on the game. And in fact, what we've seen in Alaska is that a lot of urban fishermen and hunters have gone out to harvest these resources, because in the state of Alaska, anyone who's a resident qualifies as what we call a subsistence user. Our Alaska Native people are also subsistence users, but priority should be given to folks who are living off the road system, who have no other access to food. And instead, we're seeing that everyone in the state is treated equally, and our tribes are seeing more and more people coming from our urban areas out to hunt, out to fish and harvest these resources, when they can go to the grocery store and buy some chicken or beef more readily anyway. So that's where I see it's really highlighted that disconnect. And then again, sort of just this need to have the tribal voice at the management table, so that people really understand how we need to take a more holistic approach to managing these wild foods.
Talk about real systemic issues, Stephanie. Cheyenne, do you want to take this? Because I know you probably have a lot to say on this.
Yeah, so the question is, what are the systemic issues that face youth in the food system?
BIPOC community overall in the food production, and
Okay.
how has COVID really exposed the vulnerabilities that we already had and brought it to the forefront?
Okay, yeah, so I can talk a bit about farming for youth, because that's primarily what I do. So I would say the systemic issues for youth getting into agriculture who are BIPOC is twofold. So the first one being education. When we're thinking about how does one become a farmer, there's a very, very little pathways into that. So first, you could be growing up in a family of farmers and learning in that way. But that's also very rare, considering that the average age of a farmer in Canada is upwards of 60. So there's another way you could do it, which is to go to school at Guelph or Humber to learn about agriculture, which is a very valid and a really great option. But not everyone maybe lives in those areas, or maybe has access to learn that way. And then the last choice is you could work on a farm, which is primarily what the majority of young farmers do, is they work on an organic farm. But many of these options are actually unpaid internships. So what is an unpaid internship? It's when someone works for a full season, 1 or 2 seasons, on an organic farm to learn how to farm, and they are not paid monetary. They are sometimes given room to stay at, or sometimes given food, or both, but they are not paid for their labor. So who can do the third option? Someone who has wealth, someone who can take 6 months, 8 months off from work and work on a farm and not get paid for that labor. So that's a very important point, that not a lot of BIPOC youth who take my programs can actually access that. Maybe they don't have a car to go up in the middle of, nowhere to learn how to farm, but also maybe they have dependents that they need to take care of. Maybe they have kids, maybe they have debt. That is not available to majority of people, especially even any low-income person. So that's why we're seeing a lot of lack of BIPOC youth in agriculture, because there's really not any education opportunities. Opening a book and learning about farming is great, but you need that hand in the dirt action to know how to harvest the spinach or tackle a slug issue. So those are the issues that I'm seeing within education. So I tried to find a solution with starting growing in the margins. And I truly think that for me, when I think about when I started farming, I was very, very maybe stubborn, but I didn't want to learn on a farm that didn't reflect me. So I didn't want to learn to basically farm from someone who wasn't BIPOC, because I knew that food has a color, right? Food has a color, and that is often seen in, for example, the exploitation of migrant workers, but it's also seen in who actually gets to farm. When I go to an organic farming convention, I can usually see at least 2 people of color. That's probably the maximum I've ever seen in an organic farming convention, me and someone else. So when I'm thinking about getting into agriculture when I would say around 20, I did not see anyone else who looked like me. So I didn't have anyone to ask what their experience was, because I've dealt with a lot of racism within the food system as a farmer, and also as not a farmer. So having someone to ask questions with, having someone to mentor me would have been such a beneficial experience. So I would say education is the biggest one regarding getting started. That's a systemic issue. And there's barriers within new farmers of color getting that education. And then secondly is land access. We are on solo land here, and in Turtle Island, it's extremely important to recognize the original land stewards. And there's not a lot of movement being done regarding land back in agriculture, and I think there should be a lot more being done regarding that. But for land access and for gaining land access as a new farmer, it's almost impossible, I would say, to do that in a way that is affordable to many young youths of color that I meet. The biggest thing I see is that if you want to farm, for example, in southwestern Ontario, you want to get maybe 2 to 5 acres with a house on it so you can live and you can work. It'll be like $500,000. And really, who has that kind of money and who has that down payment? Not me, not the people I farm with. So more often than not, young farmers are actually leasing land. They're leasing land from people who have a precarious relationship with that land in general, and oftentimes end up selling it to a developer. And that's when these McMansions are being built, and that's when farmland is actually being put out of farmland and into housing development for housing that often is actually too expensive for the majority of people in the area. So I'm noticing education and land access are the 2 biggest ones. Regarding me, growing the margins is what I try to do for the education point. But for the land access, it's a bit more tricky. Sundance Harvest is lucky that I do lease in the city of Toronto. So I have a lease for 1-year terms for my 2 greenhouses and the land that I farm outside. But when I'm thinking about more rural aspects and maybe starting a land trust one day, it gets a bit murky. So I'm really excited to see in the future what can be done regarding land access. But I think moving forward, the best ways to tackle that for BIPOC youth is to create a land trust, and to create a land trust in solidarity with local Indigenous nations, whether that be to create a land trust and then transition that into land back, or also create a cooperative farm, which I'm seeing a few of the youth I work with are interested in.
Great answer, Cheyenne. Bill, do you have anything else to add to this?
I would say Cheyenne nailed it. I feel like access at a young age is so crucial. To if you don't live rurally, if you don't have access to land to farm or to garden as a young person, you're far less likely to develop a relationship with food production. Also, starting a farm has been so difficult and so slow going for me, and it's because I didn't come from wealth, and everything in farming is so expensive, from the land, to every last piece of machinery or equipment, tools. Everything is just so expensive, and I feel like that just makes it seem kind of out of reach for a lot of young people that would love to be getting into farming. So yeah, I feel like more resources need to be allocated to, you know, programs like Cheyenne's got going, to schools to create, you know, school gardens in city environments, you know, in BIPOC communities, you know, things like that. So yeah,
Very well said, Bill.
that's
Very well said. And Chris, I know you touched on a lot of this question in your introduction. Is there anything more you wanted to add?
One of the things I think with the farm worker program is for us to understand that we've got to contextualize it. We have to understand that the seasoned migrant workers that come to Canada is a legacy of both slavery and indentureship. It's a product of colonialism. And not only are Canadian corporations, Canadian agricultural corporations, rather profiting from the exploited labor of migrant farm workers, the countries where many of the workers come from they're farmers themselves. And they're losing out as a result of this unbalanced relationship between the North and the South. So a couple of solutions that we've been talking about across all the migrant worker groups have been talking about permanent status on arrival, that workers should not be tied to an employer, and our immigration laws here in Canada or anywhere else should not be used to divide workers based on race, number one. Number two, to highlight what each one of us has been talking about, is valuing racialized labor, is valuing the skills that migrants and all racialized communities bring to the table when farming. So in addition to thinking about status upon arrival, one of the challenges we put towards the industry and the federal government is, why don't we start thinking about cooperatives where migrant farm workers are able to grow the land here as well in their home countries? Let's start valuing the labor that they bring to our society and not treating them as disposable labor. So I think these are the two challenges I want us to think about. How do we reframe our immigration laws? How do we think about developing collectives where migrant workers are seen as equals in our society? And how do we start thinking about challenging the way that food production exists? That we're looking at a system that's basically towards a few large corporations where the rest of us are suffering.
Chris, you're so leading me on to the next question that I have, burning question I have in my mind. So I want to ask each of you, if there is one policy that you would like to influence or bring forward that addresses the inequities of the BIPOC food producers, what would that be? Let me start with Bill this time.
Like I said in the last segment, I feel like more money needs to be, and more resources in general need to be allocated to small producers and to programs that help cultivate small producers. Agriculture is heavily subsidized, but not the subsidies don't go to the right people. When I started farming, I looked into grants and things like that and found it very difficult to actually be eligible, you know, for any of those programs. And I feel like basically you've got to be in agriculture and already be a big player most of the time to actually be eligible for any of the subsidies at all. So I feel like more needs to be done in that respect. Subsidies need to be put, you know, in different places. If you want, if the goal is to create more farmers, more small farmers, and farmers of color, then resources need to be allocated to doing that.
You're bang on to that, Bill. It's that is one of the biggest things. Chris, what do you think from your perspective? What is that one policy that you want to bring forward?
So we get asked that question a lot of times, and I can't just simply say one thing. It has to be a multi-jurisdictional, multi-pronged process. What happens in our area is, with respect to housing, we go to the federal government, they blame the province and the municipality. The municipality blames the provinces and feds. So we want to hold all three levels of government and the growers all accountable at the same time. So it's about collective resistance, building power, ending the ability for employers to indenture workers, and ensuring that people come here as equals, not as indentured labor.
That is really great. I turn it back to Stephanie. Stephanie, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I heard among all the panelists were all talking about the same things: access, funding, elevating BIPOC voices. I think one thing I'd like to see that I'm tired of doing, and I think Bill alluded to this a bit in terms of him trying to apply for these grants, is we need entirely separate pots of funding for these initiatives so that we are not having to fight against large farmers, or in my case, having to fight against large commercial fishing operations, right? Like, we're the little guys, and we're not going to have the same level of lobbying that's happening because we don't have those resources to start with. And so if we try and put in for these funding opportunities, we're just getting beat out by people who just have way more staff or way more capacity than our little organizations or outfits do. So I would advocate, entirely separate pots of money that's just for these initiatives. And then I think the last thing is, like, we're all working kind of grassroots, bottom up. We need people of color in positions that are making these decisions. We just need more people who are elected officials who look like us.
Awesome. Cheyenne?
Yeah, I feel like Stephanie is really bang on with that answer. I would say regarding to land access, there needs to be better policy for that to exist. So to draw upon what Stephanie said, I do agree there should be a separate pot, so to say, for BIPOC youth or BIPOC people who'd like to have access to land, and they could access a grant or a loan or something of that sort. Because when we're thinking about if, for example, there is like a loan or a grant access fund, if it was for everyone, and we're thinking in the mind frame of affirmative action, does a white farmer start at the very same point of the race as a black farmer, for example? No, the black farmer starts 1,000 meters back. So at the end of the day, despite it being a grant and there's fair process, really who has that advantage? So I would say that there should be a separate funding, and there should be funding allocated directly to land access. Here in Ontario, a lot of the farmland is being developed away from farmland, good, rich, loamy soil that could feed communities, to literally McMansions, these houses that are taking up space on beautiful land that could be growing nourishing vegetables. So having land access, I think, is a big one, but also in general, having land not be developed in that way also needs to be in place for that to happen.
It is a whole conversation about equality versus equity.
Yes.
And I think now people are looking at it a little more, and I see a couple of grants a little more coming out, a little focused, but it's far from where it should be. So I totally hear you. So I have a question that came from an audience, which is a very valid, it's a really interesting question, because we've been talking about policy changes, government. Now, what concrete thing can consumers do to support BIPOC producers and farmers? And let's start with you, Cheyenne, because I have a feeling you have something to say about that.
Well, you're right. So regarding consumers, so the easiest thing as for a consumer can do is vote with their dollar. So when you're buying a head of lettuce, do you know where the head of lettuce is grown? Do you know if ethical work practices were in place? Do you know if the farmer exploited migrant workers or not? Or do you know if the farm is run by someone who historically has been dispossessed within the food system? So that's the biggest thing you can do, is being more conscious about what produce you're buying, for example, and understanding the backstory of that produce, and not the flashy backstory you may see on their Instagram page, but also getting to know the farmer in itself. That could be as simple as asking at the farmer's market their growing practices. It could also be asking your friends if they know any BIPOC farmers or producers. Here at Sundance Harvest, I grow my vegetables, but I also outsource value-added products. I purchase maple syrup from a First Nations owned maple syrup business all the way far north in St. Joseph's Island. So me doing that, I'm directly investing in this First Nations owned maple syrup business, when there's many, many, many white settler owned maple syrup businesses in Ontario that are exploiting maple trees and tapping them in ways that aren't in relationship with the earth. So that's something that directly I can do, even though I'm I'm not technically a farm consumer. I'm still a consumer. So I'm actively deciding, okay, well, who am I supporting? If I love some pancakes, I might as well get maple syrup that's ethically produced and supporting a BIPOC-owned enterprise.
Awesome. Does anybody else have anything to add to this? I'm opening up to the...
I just want to make sure that let's rethink this. Let's not think of ourselves as consumers, but as residents, of people part of a community, and that each aspect or each one of us are part of a community. So it's about building this power that I keep talking about, and it's about thinking about pushing not only simultaneous changes along the food chain, whether it's targeting large corporations, but also changing government policies. So industry is going to be against minimum wage increases, against any form of changes to occupational health and safety. Let's use our power as people to push for government changes. Let's also start thinking about, as grassroots communities, if a migrant farm worker, for instance, is injured and he's facing a deportation, how do we basically replicate a system where we provide the supports, that mutual aid systems, to ensure that people aren't faced with a choice between going home to die versus basically being alone here in a situation like that. So let's think ourselves as residents and part of a community, part of a collective.
Chris, listening to you always gives me goosebumps. Like just direct call to action. Bill or Stephanie, anything to add to what we heard from Cheyenne and Chris? Okay, so the next question we have from the audience is federal governments have previously opened up funding for food security. Have these programs had a positive impact on BIPOC communities? What recommendations would you want to give governments to improve these programs? Stephanie, do you want to start with that?
Well, I think my federal government might be a little different than Canada's federal government right now. And even within the United States, Alaska is sort of just unique, like I was saying, because our tribes don't have reservations. We don't have the same sovereign rights as lower 48 tribes. And as a result, we just end up getting treated a little bit differently. And also because we're not cultivating our food, it doesn't quite fit into some of these food sovereignty funding opportunities, because those are mostly about farming and ranching. And ours is, we're trying to harvest wild foods. We're trying to just have access to those resources. It's not about, we're not trying to put in a fish hatchery, right? That would actually go against our values and our ethos. But yeah, so we're trying to like fit into a square, but our issues are, are a circle. So I think at least in our case, we're struggling with access to those particular funding opportunities.
Totally makes sense. Bill, is there anything that you want to add on Stephanie?
I'm not sure about FENM have addressed anything, but they're in Washington State. We have quite a few state-run programs that have done a lot to help with access to food. Like there's a program in Seattle that takes money that was set aside from the sugar tax that was enacted a few years back, and now there's a fund for bringing healthy snacks to kids in schools that we're actually going to be a part of this next year, where the schools are able to buy directly from farmers, from small farmers. And I think that's a fantastic program. And I feel like that's something that can happen across the nation. Also the hospital program that we are a part of. I mean, if more funds were allocated to programs like that, I think that could really help get food into the homes of people who really need it.
The whole sound of sugar tax really sounds so wonderful sitting in Canada, and without even knowing where you're from, we can always guess you're from Washington State. So thank you. Cheyenne or Chris, do you have anything to add on the federal government in Canada side?
I can add something. So first off, I wouldn't say Sundance Harvest does food security work, because I mainly grow food, and I wouldn't say like the price of my food could be as accessible as other food. But from knowing great organizations, nonprofits that can do food security work because they get the funding to do that, such as Black Creek Community Farm or Food Share. From what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing is there can be a lot more that can be done. So when we're thinking about food insecurity is not caused by a lack of food, it's by a lack of resources. So that could be access to land, access to traditional hunting land, access to natural foodways, that education is a resource, or also income. Largely in Toronto, it's going to be income. For food, there's so much food. When we see many grocery stores throw out dumpsters and dumpsters of food every single day, we know that there's enough food to feed people. But in a city like Toronto, where I live, when housing is so high, when rent is so high, and when there's very, very kind of not a lot of jobs that can pay more than minimum wage, we have to think, well, why can't people access that food? So I feel like if not the government providing land access and resources like that, there should be a lot more work done regarding raising the minimum wage, ensuring that there's a rent freeze, and also ensuring that people can day to day take care of their everyday needs, such as rent and food, education, without having to take money away from food and devote that to rent. So I think that's the biggest thing, is focusing on, well, what are the resources people need to actually not be food insecure in the long term? So I think that's what I would say.
Awesome. Chris, let me ask you a different question. What lesson has 2020 taught you that will help you better prepare for the upcoming season?
COVID's only basically laid open to everyone the hostility and the inequality of our society. And the first part of this answer, I think I have to return back to the funding. And only thing, every month my jaw has dropped with the tens of millions of dollars that have been given to industry without any accountability or transparency to the people who need need the PPE or proper housing. So that's the first problem. I think that's the first thing. The second of all, we as a society, I think, have to really fundamentally think about what is our food system based on. What is our immigration system based on? Why it has our inequalities perpetuated at a time of a crisis when we should be trying to find ways to make our society more equal? What is our global responsibility to the people of the Caribbean, of Mexico, of Central and South America? And how are we impacting their food production by a system of agriculture that's based on dominance, global dominance? And that's us here in the West, whether it's the United States and Canada. So for us, how do we build these larger forms of resistance that's local, where people are taking grassroots activities, but it's across the world. It's across all of us saying that we say no to corporate agriculture. We say no to these power imbalances of lobbying. And, over the last couple of weeks, power, right? The inherent powerlessness of migrant workers, where we see every time we speak of crisis, what's done to respond to this crisis is the provincial federal government throws money at the same people creating the crisis in the first place. So migrant workers have to be decision makers, equal decision makers, not basically paternalistic tokens put at the side conversation way, way, way at the back of the bus. That is unacceptable in the 21st century. It never was acceptable, but today this is paramount for us to try to think about fundamental changes.
Amazing. This question I'm going to gear towards Cheyenne. Cheyenne, what can be done to assist producers trying to shift their business models to online markets?
So I would say that for me, I'm quite lucky that my farmers market, Dufferin Grove Farmers Market, was really cool, because at the very beginning of the pandemic, they knew that this would hit producers quite hard. So they transitioned online very, very fast. So I would say the biggest thing is not a lot of farmers like myself, or maybe I'm speaking for myself, are very tech savvy. For me, I had a really hard time understanding how to put things online and how to work that out. But now that I have my farm store all set up and running, the biggest thing I would say is word of mouth and sharing it around. Sometimes a lot of people don't know that certain farms are online. So if folks who purchase from those farms can let other people know and say, hey, purchase from this Toronto farm or purchase from this Ontario farm, I feel like that would help a lot more. But overall, I think it's patience, but also sharing the word of why it's cool and important to buy local and produce and buy local produce from BIPOC farms.
Bill, I know you have something to say on this.
Yeah, online sales are the future. They're the way to go. I kind of feel like so we started out when we started out with our CSA, we pretty much started immediately with the online aspect because we kind of saw online shopping being the future, and it's the way to go. There are some things that the thing that we really that we changed this year that helped us a lot was we got some software that connected directly to a route app. So as long as the addresses were typed into the online store, then it just automatically synced up with the routing app, and we were able to just make it, and it created a route for us, which saved us gobs of time. That's one thing. And then as far as switching over, social media is really important for getting the word out. That's the most important tool that we've had for marketing. Everything is definitely using social media. It does wonders as far as getting the word out. And you've kind of got to figure out what your community is on too. Like a lot of our community they're not on Instagram at all. Everyone here is on Facebook, so we kind of had to figure that out, little things like that. But I definitely would recommend it if you're thinking about going online and aren't really sure. Definitely do it. It's the way to go. It makes things a lot more convenient for people, and convenience is kind of the name of the game for your customers with everything. It seems like the easier it is for them, the more likely they are to do it. It's been great for us going online with our store. So definitely would recommend it.
To all the audience, you heard it here, you heard it from Bill. Social media, it's at, so please go, we need the support. So with this, I'm going to really thank all four of you for this wonderful and very informative conversation. Stephanie, Bill, Cheyenne, and Chris, it's really amazing talking to you and hearing about what's happening and the challenges that the community faces when they're trying to do something like this. So, and to all the audience, we hope that this is not the conversation that ends here. We as people of color, people who's in the food production industry, we really hope that this is the beginning. This is just the beginning of a conversation, and I hope that you as audiences continue this conversation, not only with your summit attendees and throughout the summit, but going forward in your regular lives, because it's important. Please make sure that share the on-demand section, as there is a great podcast interview with Letitia, who's the director of the Black Creek Community Farm that Cheyenne was talking about. It is about the community-based solutions to food security. So please go and listen to the podcast. There's some really important stuff out there. And there are some great prizes to be won. Oh, how come I didn't know this before? Prizes. I like that sound of it. Enter the prize code JUSTICE, JUSTICE, all in caps, with the in the win prizes section to claim some prize points. Don't miss out on that. But more so, join us at 4:30 for our virtual happy hour. You can choose your own adventure with cocktail making classes, at 4:30 and 5, or join hosted group video chat in networking section. There will be a great topics of discussion such as work-life balance during COVID, climate change, and farming and nutrition and food trends. So please, everybody, keep this conversation going. This is really important. Once again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Bill, Stephanie, Cheyenne, and Chris. Listening to you not only get me goosebumps and makes me want to get up from my seat and go make a change. And I hope all the audience can feel the same way and wanting to make some change in the world of BIPOC food production. So just any of the panelists want to say a last word of goodbye? We have a minute before we sign off. No, otherwise, everybody, thank you very much. Goodbye from all of us to the audience. And yeah, we are looking forward to the next session at the Arrell Food Summit.